The Ebola outbreak shakes health officials worldwide. New travel restrictions to the U.S., more cases, more deaths. And today, a fearful and angry mob torched a treatment center in the eastern Congo. Pay out pot for punks. That is what North Carolina Republican Senator Thom Tillis calls President Trump's proposed weaponization compensation fund. Other skeptical Republicans appear on the verge of killing it or scaling it way back. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's no longer in Congress, but she has thoughts on Thomas Massey's defeat in Kentucky Tuesday and the so-called Epstein class of rulers who she said punished Massey and her for trying to expose Epstein's crimes and relationships. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in New York. Welcome to the Takeout. We are going to start tonight with Ebola. Not because I want to scare you or sensationalize a scary-sounding virus. Quite the opposite. I want to help you understand what feels like a rising tide of headlines about Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country more than 900,000 square miles, which makes it the second largest on the African continent. The size of that landmass matters when assessing Ebola risks. We'll have more on that in a moment. Here is where things stand. 139 suspected deaths, 600 suspected cases. Suspected is the operative word here because surveillance is behind the curve and containment possibly has been broken with travel outside of the hot zones in the eastern Congo. The Congo, we should remind ourselves, is a poor country. 80% of its population categorized as impoverished. There are armed conflicts in the same part of the country where Ebola is now spreading. This makes healthcare delivery extremely difficult. Another complication? Modern medicine and its interventions in cases like this can sometimes trample on local customs, such as washing dead bodies as part of a burial rite or an elaborate funeral. And it is precisely that kind of close contact, the washing of bodies, elaborate burial ceremonies, that can spread Ebola generally and this Ebola virus in particular, a virus that we should note does not have a vaccine. And today this conflict, modern medicine, local customs, led a mob to burn an Ebola treatment facility. That mob was trying to retrieve a body, an apparent victim of Ebola. Aid workers fled the scene in panic. And you no doubt heard about the Air France flight scheduled to land in Detroit but diverted to Montreal because the passenger on board had been in the Congo. It was not known if this passenger had any symptoms or when this person was in the Congo. The United States is now refusing entry to any passenger without a U.S. passport who has been in the Congo, Uganda, or South Sudan in the past 3 weeks. So how much will all of this help? Also, U.S. passport holders from these three countries will now be diverted to one U.S. airport, Dulles, in suburban Washington, D.C. For more on all of this, I want to bring in CBS News medical correspondent Dr. Celine Gounder. And helpfully for this conversation, she's an infectious disease specialist who spent time in Guinea as an Ebola aid worker during the West African epidemic. Dr. Gounder, you heard my opening monologue about this. Help my audience understand where we are and, importantly, the size of the Congo as a way to assess cumulative or understandable risks.
So the DRC, the Congo, is about as big as Western Europe. It's a massive country in Central Africa, but it's also very difficult to travel long distances, and that's part of the challenge that we're seeing right now. This is also an outbreak that is occurring along the eastern border of the DRC, next to Uganda, where there have been a couple cases, and also South Sudan, where you have large refugee populations. And there are some suspected cases now in South Sudan, as well as we had heard earlier today, Kenya. The rate at which cases are this has many of the same factors that led to the huge outbreak, the largest outbreak epidemic we've ever seen of Ebola, which was in West Africa, 2014 to 2016, which is when I worked there. So what are some of those factors? It's the fact that you're seeing Ebola in urban areas, not just rural areas. The fact that you're seeing cross-border spread, the fact that you have these mobile populations. In the case of this current outbreak, that you have a lot of mining that occurs in this area, and it's not just gold mining; it's also mining for minerals that are used in your smartphones, in your EVs, and other modern technology. On top of that, you have Rwandan-backed militia groups, M23, which have been trying to essentially control the minerals, the mining. And the combination of the presence of that armed militia on top of USAID, so Americans having pulled out from the region, has led to the collapse of health systems, including supplies, so personal protective equipment, things like your gowns, gloves, masks. That supply chain has also collapsed, and there's a real shortage of those things, which is leading to healthcare workers getting infected, and then also pharmaceutical treatment. So it's an extremely challenging situation that people are dealing with on the ground. And
Right.
then
And
layer on top of that issues of trust. And I think people in the US,
Dr. Gounder, we're having a little bit of
I think people
connectivity
in the US will
issues.
be familiar with some. Let me,
I,
maybe I can go off camera if that's better.
uh, let's just try to muscle our way through this for one more question, Dr. Gounder. All the
Work
things
through
that
it?
you said
Okay.
that are creating
Yeah.
complications and difficulties, what do you think we should look for in the next, let's say, week or so in terms of headlines or things letting us get a glimpse of whether or not this is being contained or whether or not it's spreading at an alarming rate?
Do we see more spread over borders? Do we see more healthcare workers getting infected? And at what rate do we see people getting exposed and new cases being diagnosed? I think that's going to be really important. The other thing, and I think people will understand this from COVID, trust is everything. And the fact that we've already seen Ebola treatment unit being set on fire, this was at Wampara Hospital, that we're seeing again resistance to isolation. And I think people here will understand not wanting to mask, not wanting to get vaccinated, not wanting to stay at home if they're sick. It's very similar kinds of behavior that you're seeing in this context. How do you bridge that trust gap and get people to cooperate with health officials, but to do so in a way that is compassionate and meets their needs as well?
Very quickly, because the connection's gotten so much better, I want to get one more question in, if possible, Dr. Gounder. What about these travel restrictions? How should we think about them? Are they helpful, or are they sending a sign that maybe alarms people more than is actually helpful?
I think the way to think about how to be worried, it's not worried about what's going to happen here in the US, it's worried about what's going to happen there. But that also means in order to contain it there, which is how we actually protect ourselves, we need to be able to surge a response there. And that means we need to be able to get healthcare workers in and out. The fact that the first American physician to have been infected, at least so far in this outbreak, was flown to Germany, not back to the US, even though we have the capacity, the facilities to care for them here. That is really concerning. A lot of people in my world who were thinking about volunteering to go are having second thoughts because they're worried, if I get sick, where am I going to end up? If I go over there, am I going to be allowed back in the country? And we saw issues with that back in 2014, controversies about travel bans back then, and that leads to a lot of hesitation, will make it harder to respond to this outbreak.
Dr. Celine Gounder, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Congress, House and Senate, left town without voting on what the Justice Department has called its anti-weaponization compensation fund. That's a quote. Democrats and Republicans have either been skeptical or, in some cases, highly critical of a plan that would set aside some $1.7 billion for legal bills for those who feel they were unfairly targeted by the Biden Justice Department. On that topic, here was North Carolina Republican Senator Thom Tillis when asked what he wanted to hear from the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who signed off on this fund.
About the payout pot for punks? Not a lot. Look, under what circumstances would it ever make sense to provide restitution for people who were either pled guilty or were found guilty in a court of law? This is just stupid on stilts.
Blanche was on the Hill today in a closed-door meeting with Senate Republicans. CBS's Nicole Killian joins me now from Capitol Hill, where you have some new Enterprise reporting on what turned out to be a very tense meeting. Nicole?
Yeah, that's right. This meeting lasted for almost 2 hours, Major, and it ended with not much resolution. The acting attorney general left, and then a short time later, we learned that the Senate was going to cancel votes on this broad reconciliation package, which again was the goal this week to try to move forward funding for ICE and CBP. But when the Justice Department unveiled this new anti-weaponization fund earlier this week, a lot of senators expressed a similar view to Senator Tillis, that they feel like this stinks. They want more clarity about how this is going to operate. And even though Blanche testified on the Hill earlier this week, he came back to sit down with Republican lawmakers because basically they were considering some guardrails for this fund as part of the reconciliation package. And that was something that only came up in light of this fund. Now, earlier this week, I asked Leader Thune his thoughts about the fund. Take a listen.
Do you believe this is a legitimate fund, and do you believe those terms are fair?
I think that there are and will be, continue to be, a lot of questions around that the administration is going to have to answer.
And even after making those comments to me, lawmakers continue to have plenty of questions about this fund. Thune acknowledged as much, saying that members still have a lot of concerns after this meeting with Todd Blanche. Most notably, the chief concern here is whether or not people who assaulted law enforcement here at the Capitol on January 6th should be compensated by this fund. Most lawmakers are in agreement, both Republican and Democrat, that should not be the case. Now, there were at least 2 senators that told me they got some assurances from Blanche out of this meeting that those types of individuals would not be compensated. But one of those senators, and this is an important senator, Susan Collins, she said she wants to see something in writing, some language. She wants greater clarity. And she told other reporters, that Blanche's explanation didn't necessarily change her mind about this fund. You have other senators like Bill Cassidy who say he doesn't even think there should be a fund like this. So because of all of this disagreement, that's why the votes were canceled on this reconciliation package. Leader Thune telling me he hopes they can try to come to some resolution when senators return next month after the Memorial Day recess.
A political headache that has derailed an important piece of legislation. Nicole Killian with all the details from Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. Legal director for the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown University Law School, Ropa Bhattacharya, joins me now. She worked in the Justice Department and helped compensate those who were injured or died on 9/11. So this fund has been compared to some of these previous compensation funds, but is there any genuine precedent for what this fund seeks to accomplish?
In a word, no. Every other compensation fund that I've worked on, including the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, was created by Congress. And Congress set out the eligibility criteria. It set out the harms for which compensation could be awarded, and it provided some guidelines around the amounts of compensation that could be awarded. None of that exists here. There's no congressional statute that created this fund. There's no court oversight of this fund. And there are serious legal questions about how this settlement and this fund have been created and the sources of funding that are being used.
When he testified earlier this week, the acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, compared this fund to a fund that was established to compensate African-American farmers in this country who had for decades been denied access to various agriculture programs. Do you see any comparison between those two?
So to the extent that there is a comparison, it's a very small one. In a lot of respects, that settlement was quite different from this one. Number one, it was pursuant to a court order and was court supervised. Number two, it was less money. Number three, much of the money did go to actual victims of the underlying conduct that was alleged in the lawsuit that was being settled, which is not the case here. And number four, there was a small part of the money that did go to sort of non-parties in the lawsuit under a specific doctrine that applies in class action cases. That's the example that they're pointing to. But that piece of the money, which was a small piece of the settlement, although still a large amount of money, it was, I think, a few $100 million, was extremely controversial at the time, and Republicans in particular objected to it so much that when the first Trump administration came into office, Attorney General Sessions banned the practice of using settlement money to pay off third parties to the litigation.
You have a lot of great detail on all of the specifics here. Let's just step back for a second because it's worth considering how this got started. There was a leak of the president's tax returns. He sued as president the Internal Revenue Service for $10 billion. And part of the settlement was the creation of this fund. Help my audience understand exactly how precedented or unprecedented that whole part is.
It's pretty unprecedented. First of all, the collusive nature of the lawsuit is entirely unprecedented. The president here is on both sides of the V in the litigation. He is both the plaintiff who is seeking the settlement and ultimately controls the defendant who is offering the settlement. That sort of collusive litigation and the conflicts that arise as a result I've never seen that happen before. Number two, as I said, it's generally the practice in settlements that the party who gets the money are the victims. That's not happening here. The victims of the underlying conduct that's alleged in the lawsuit. But more concerningly, as a general rule, when money comes into the United States from whatever source, including in settlement of litigation, that money is supposed to go to the general treasury so that Congress can appropriate it under its constitutional power of the purse. The legal authority that they are relying on to divert those settlement funds into this new anti-weaponization fund is entirely unclear to me.
Rupa Bhattacharya, Georgetown University Law. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Still to come on the Takeout, former Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She left Congress because of a battle with President Trump, and she talks to me about the latest casualty, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, and the general thrust, she believes, of the Republican Party. Also, former Tennessee Republican Senator and Governor Lamar Alexander's new memoir on decades of public service. He also has some thoughts on the current Trump administration and some Senate Republicans. Plus, the long-delayed Democratic National Committee autopsy about the 2024 election. Our political panel reacts to that and all the controversy surrounding it. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. After Congressman Thomas Massie's defeat in Kentucky on Tuesday, that was in a Republican primary, another Republican targeted by President Trump defended him. Former Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. I spoke with her about that and a whole lot more. Please listen. Upon Thomas Massie's defeat Tuesday night, Marjorie, you said that he was a giant among weak, pathetic men. Who are the weak, pathetic men you referred to?
Many of the men that I served with in Congress and the United States House of Representatives, primarily the men that make these promises on the campaign trail and then never deliver them. And it's actually Thomas Massie who was one of the few members of Congress that did follow through with his promises to his constituents.
And that got him, in some cases, the direct ire of the President of the United States. Do you include him in that category of weak, pathetic men?
Well, actually, it shouldn't. See, that's the thing, is it shouldn't have gotten him in the ire of President Trump, because actually Thomas Massie's policies and his bills and his voting record was very America first, is very America first. He'll still be there for 7 more months. And that is what has so many people upset. In 2024, the American people delivered a mandate, and the mandate was put America first, no more foreign wars. We wanted accountability, demanded accountability from the elites, and primarily the Epstein class. And it was Thomas Massie that was following through on that exact mandate. So there never should have been this disagreement.
You also write in your social media post, releasing the Epstein files was our demise, meaning you and Thomas Massie. What do you mean by that?
Yes, it was the reason that President Trump turned on both of us, because Thomas Massie myself, Lauren Boebert, and Nancy Mace, we were the only Republicans that signed the discharge petition forcing that resolution to the House floor for a vote to release the Epstein files. That's when President Trump turned on me. The president already was angry at Thomas Massie over a few things, but that's what really turned his anger towards Thomas Massie. For Thomas Massie and I both, we took different paths, but the results was still the same. Neither one of us will be members of the House of Representatives.
You write that America is ruled by a so-called Epstein class. Is President Trump in that Epstein class of rulers, and what does that class do?
I would say absolutely. I think many Americans agree with this statement. It's something I hear frequently from people. It's something you see all over social media. And the Epstein class is a class of elites that are never held accountable. They continue to dominate no matter which political party is in charge. And this is what the American people are really tired of. You know, it was under Democrats and Republicans both that inflation was very high, gas was unaffordable. Under different administrations for decades of both parties, there was foreign wars that continued on and on. But this is what the American people are tired of, and they very much want to be able to have a say in the policies and the decisions that are made in Washington, but they don't. And the proof is there on the Tuesday election results. The proof was there that a congressional seat could be bought by several billionaires representing a foreign lobby and not the people of Kentucky.
Which foreign lobby?
That would be AIPAC, Israel-focused donors.
And that is something that you believe represents a long-term threat to the future of the Republican Party?
I think anytime you have donors, billionaires that are donating and focused on congressional seats or any type of political seat, and their interest is for a foreign country, that can be any foreign country, that can be any foreign country in the world. I think that is a direct threat to the American people. I do.
In his concession speech, Thomas Massie noted that he has 50,000 donors and that his effort to seek and secure re-election through that primary was a campaign that turned into a movement. On social media, you wrote that that movement will be led by younger generations who hate the old guard with an unquenchable passion. What role will you play in that new movement, and do you think Thomas Massie has a role in something approximating a post-Trump Republican Party?
This movement that I was speaking of and that Thomas Massie talked about, that movement actually exists, and that's what MAGA was supposed to be. So this movement is actually continuing. It's taking different shape and what many would call America First. But the movement is actually growing and forming. You're seeing people coming from both sides of the political aisle, people from the left and the right that are very, very disgusted with their own political party because they feel like it, whether it's left, right, Democrat, Republican, these parties really are one and the same. And the results are generally one and the same, except for, a few social issues on the outliers. And this movement going forward, I believe, is the most important movement that can take place in America because it is led by the younger generations. It's for their future, not for the older generations and that's my parents' generation. I dearly love them, but it's really the younger people, and they're voting for the issues that affect them and matter most in their lives. And I stand with them. I do.
What role will you play in it?
Well, I don't know if we have roles that I can pick and choose from, but I will definitely be a loud voice and align myself with them and see where it develops going forward.
All right, let's go more immediate statewide politics. How do you assess Republican chances in the governor's race and the Senate race this fall?
Well, I mean, which governor's races are you specifically talking about?
In Georgia.
In Georgia, well, we are a close state. However, I feel like in this particular governor's race, I think the Republican nominee should pull ahead based on the Democrat nominee being Keisha Lance Bottoms. If you're in Georgia, you can remember when she was mayor of Atlanta, and that was when the BLM riots happened. And there's I would say many police officers across the state, many people were very unhappy with her leadership as mayor. That will give the Republican primary winner a definite edge over her as the Democrat nominee.
How about the United States Senate race? Jon Ossoff appears to have lots of money, and there's going to be a Republican runoff. How about the prospects there?
Well, for quite some time, I have yet to see a poll where any Republican candidate edges out Jon Ossoff. He's an incumbent. Incumbents have tremendous power in re-elections. So I'm not sure how the chances are there. We'll see how the Republican runoff comes through. We'll see which one comes ahead, and then we'll see how it takes shapes going forward.
Last question before I let you go. What is your opinion, Marjorie Taylor Greene, on this fund created by the Justice Department to pay victims, so-called, of Biden-era lawfare or weaponization?
Forgive me for not knowing the deep details on that one. What I fear may happen, and I stood up for a lot of the people, the J6ers, mainly the ones that walk through open doors, walk through the Capitol, and then turn around and walked out. And then the Department of Justice came down on them with the most heavy hand. But I think what I fear for them is this is another shiny object that's like red meat being thrown at the base to get people fired up and think something's actually being done when nothing is actually being done. And so it was BLM and Antifa rioters. Over 95% of them had their charges dropped, but over 95% of J6ers went to prison and were treated very unfairly. Definitely had harsher consequences than any of the left rioters during 2020. So, I don't like political lawfare. I think it's very unfair, but we'll see what shapes up out of this fund.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Coming up, former Tennessee governor, senator, and two-time presidential hopeful Lamar Alexander joins me to discuss his new book, which talks about his career, long time in public service, and the state of the Republican Party under President Trump. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Tennessee Republican Lamar Alexander served as a U.S. senator, governor, Secretary of Education, ran for president in 1996 and 2000. He chronicles 6 decades in public life in his new book, The Education of a Senator, From JFK to Trump. Lamar Alexander joins me now. Senator, you retired just days before the Capitol riot and write in the book about returning to the Capitol days later. How did that affect you and how you viewed President Trump?
Well, going back turned my stomach. I mean, I served there 18 years, and I walked back in 3 days after the rioters tried to keep Joe Biden from being elected president, and I saw the shattered glass, I saw the doors broken, and it reminded me that in our country, George Washington said the most important election of our new country was not the first one, but the second one, the peaceful transfer of power from one to another. And I was shocked by what I saw.
Do you believe there has been a concerted effort within your party to rewrite the history of that day? And in that light, how do you regard this weaponization compensation fund that is being attempted to be stood up by the Trump Justice Department?
Well, this fund's it smells pretty fishy to me. I mean, it's Trump suing Trump, and then Trump settling with Trump, and then taking taxpayer funds and distributing it to friends of President Trump. I've never heard of anything quite like that before, and I hope it doesn't happen.
How do you regard what Senate Republicans either have or have not done within the body of the United States Senate to check what is quite clearly an aggressive application, and some might argue, and certainly scholars have, expansion of presidential powers in this second Trump term?
Well, the expansion's been going on for a long time,
Sure.
but in the first Trump term, I mean, I was one of those who stood up to the president from time to time when we disagreed with him. I remember when he tried to use $3.6 billion of money we appropriated for military barracks and for schools for military children. He wanted to use that to build the wall. There were 22 of us who said, no, that's not right, Mr. President. 12 of us voted against that. The resolution passed saying that was wrong. He vetoed it, but the court stopped him on that. I'd like to see the Republican senators assert themselves more. I mean, if I were there today, I think I'd organize a bipartisan breakfast and we would read Article 1 of the Constitution to each other. I mean, the Congress has all the power over taxes, all the power over tariffs, has the right to declare war, all the power over spending, and the president really needs the advice of Republican senators. He should welcome that advice.
How do you regard the defeat last Saturday of Bill Cassidy, Republican senator from Louisiana, and now the president's endorsement of Ken Paxton in the Texas runoff Tuesday against sitting Republican Senator John Cornyn?
I know both those senators, and they're excellent senators. It's hard for me to see what the president's strategy is in not endorsing John Cornyn. I mean, he's respected, he's a leader, he's conservative, he voted with President Trump 99% of the time. It's hard for me to see how the president's going to get his agenda through the Senate in the next 7 months if he keeps purging Republican senators who support him. So perhaps Senator Cornyn will be reelected.
And in the meantime, Senator Cornyn and Senator Cassidy might join Tom Tillis, Republican senator from North Carolina, also not seeking re-election, as a kind of flank against the Trump legislative agenda in many matters, because they're now freed up. They don't have to prove themselves. They don't have to submit to the daily loyalty test for the president and the White House. And they might have different ideas and might exercise some of that muscle you're talking about.
Well, I think it would be a good idea. For example, I think the Republican senators should say to the president, Mr. President, ask us to pass a resolution authorizing you to remove nuclear weapons from Iran. Use force if necessary. Ask us to do that. We'll give that to you. President Bush did that before the Gulf War, and then the second President Bush did that twice. In the first Gulf War, President Bush not only got the Senate to support him, he got other allies to support him. They paid for the war. I think the president is doing something that some American president eventually is going to have to do, use force to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. He'd be better off if he had the support of the Senate, and Republican senators ought to say that to him.
Before I let you go, Senator, what you just described is not that aggressive an approach. Why don't Senate Republicans make those asks of this White House? Why do you think they are so timid about this exercising of constitutionally defined legislative powers?
Well, I don't want to speak for them. I can just speak for myself. And I worked with President Trump a lot in his first term. I disagreed with him on tariffs and taxes. I voted against him on war powers and some other things, but I always did it with respect. We had a good relationship. He didn't criticize me publicly. I didn't criticize him publicly. I didn't think I was elected to make a catalog of all the things about his behavior I disagreed with. I thought I was elected and he was elected, and that we should try to work together when we could. So we did. And I think Republican senators will find that they can say what they think, and the country will be better off if they do.
The book, The Education of a Senator, From JFK to Trump. Lamar Alexander, been a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Major.
Coming up, we are weeks away from the World Cup, and New York City's mayor just scored a deal for 1,000 of the cheapest tickets to some of those soccer matches, even though no games are being played in Gotham. They're over in New Jersey. We'll discuss that and a lot more with our political panel on The Takeout. Welcome back. After what can only be described as a very long delay, series of reversals, probably some recriminations thrown in there too, the DNC has released its autopsy report on the 2024 election. The report, among other things, says former President Biden did not, quote, effectively support Kamala Harris. It also says Democrats did not successfully focus on Trump's, that is to say, candidate Trump's negatives, and claims Democratic candidates have, quote, proven incapable of projecting strength, unquote. DNC Chair Ken Martin, interestingly, says he does not endorse what is in this report. Wow. Okay, let's bring in our political panel. Republican strategist Jim McLaughlin and Democratic strategist Amanda Lippman. Well, Amanda, let's start with you. Did you read all the autopsy?
I skimmed it.
Okay.
I gave it a little glance over.
Did it say anything at all that was new to you or and in any way relevant to what you think the party needs to do in the midterms or 2028?
The DNC autopsy was so poorly done. I mean, the guy that Ken Martin chose to do it was a friend of his, Paul Rivera, who apparently did not interview any of the major players on either the campaign or the outside parties or at the party itself. He didn't keep transcripts of any of his interviews. Nothing could be fact-checked. He couldn't provide any proof of data. The amount of inaccuracies in it is unbelievable.
As I read it, it's riddled with inaccuracies.
It's riddled with inaccuracies. And not only that, it has so many blank holes. The only reason it's out is because somebody leaked it. It is just top to bottom incompetency.
Is it an indictment from your vantage point, Amanda, of Ken Martin as the DNC chair himself?
Yes. Ken Martin ran for DNC chair, promising he was going to do an autopsy and really learn from what we messed up in 2024. We spent billions of dollars and we lost an election. Why? Let's learn how to do it a little bit differently. Then come December, he says, you know what? We're actually not going to release it. As it turns out, it's because it was a load of crap. Come forward to the next 5 months, and he does interview after interview after interview, trying to gaslight us, to tell us we're the crazy ones for asking him to keep his promises. Instead, as it comes out, he couldn't get it done competently. He has no trust. He's barely raising any money. We have to stop settling for mediocre men at the top of our party. Ken Martin has got to go. It is not acceptable to have someone like him running this institution, which we desperately need people to believe in leading into the presidential primary in 2027.
Jim, I bet you're just going to sit back here and bask in the enjoy this
Let me rant a
Democratic infighting.
You know, the amazing part, and by the way, I think a lot of these autopsies, they're stupid. Because whether the DNC's doing it, or even when the RNC did it back then, it was stupid.
After 2012.
And a lot of,
and what was interesting about that, Trump ignored every single thing in that autopsy and then won in 2016.
And they told us we had to go softer on immigration. And then Donald Trump came along and said, we got to make the American people safer. But you know what they were missing in that autopsy?
In the DNC autopsy.
Yep. What they were missing in the DNC autopsy was the big number. The big number were the exit polls that were done by this network and others, where they said 70% of Americans said the country was off on the wrong track. And by the way, none of the media polls were showing that. We were seeing that in our internal polls for President Trump, and that's what we used. And it was literally what we did was we just contrasted the Democrats' record, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump.
To that point, how's that right track, wrong track working right now for you, Jim?
And look, it's not, trust me, it's not 70% right now. And look, we know what's going on. Donald Trump understands it. And right before we had our little diversion into Iran, which, by the way, is not going to last forever. And
Still
things are going to be on the right
net.
track. Yeah, it depends how you ask the question.
Always does.
When you tell people this is all about getting rid of Iran's ability to raise nuclear weapons, it's
point taken.
Not just slightly, it's like 60% support it. They think it's a good idea.
If that can be done. And the president's going to have to live up to that standard. You know that as well as I do.
And but I think it can be a big success for him.
We have an iron rule on this program. If I pitch it before the break, we have to talk about it with the panel. So I talked about the mayor and these World Cup tickets. Here's what the mayor said about it today.
These 1,000 tickets are going to be split into batches of 150 tickets for each of the 5 group stage matches and 2 knockout round matches in New York, New Jersey, and tickets will cost only $50.
Why did we highlight this? Well, there's a couple of soccer maniacs on my staff, so that's one reason. We got about 45 seconds on this. But they said, look, no other city cut this deal, not in Canada, not in Mexico, not anywhere in America. Tickets are hard to come by. The mayor did something. Amanda?
I love it. He wants to make sure that just like housing should be affordable, childcare should be affordable, so should joy, so should sports. I think it's great.
Jim?
What do I think? Typical socialist stuff. There's going to be winners and losers. They're going to have 1 million people are going to apply for these things, and yet they're only going to be able to give out 1,000.
Yeah, but if a mayor got tickets that no other mayor was able to negotiate for and lobby for, is that anyway, in your eyes, a victory for the mayor?
Mikey Sherrill should have done it, but you know what?
Yeah, because the games are in New Jersey.
You know what the amazing part is? She's been very antagonistic towards FIFA, and Phil Murphy, when he was the Democratic governor, he loved having FIFA there.
That's the last word. Jim McLaughlin. Rock and Amanda Lippman. Thanks for holding back on Ken Martin. I really appreciate that. Coming up, our CBS News radio flashback tonight. Another moment of electoral history. The first election for the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama. You remember his name. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Now for our CBS radio clip of fame. Last night, we played the sound of a true Republican presidential landslide. Ronald Reagan, 1984. Tonight, a Democratic landslide, smaller by comparison to Reagan's, but historic nonetheless. Barack Obama, 2008.
CBS News, I'm Harley Carnes. This is history. CBS News now estimates the end of the race. California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii are estimated to go to Barack Obama when the votes are totaled. And those states put him over the 270 electoral votes needed to become the first African-American president of the United States. Live now to Chicago and Grant Park, where that teeming throng awaits their hero, CBS's Steve Kathan. Steve?
Well, Harley, this night of anticipation is now a night of euphoria. People shoulder to shoulder, the big moment arriving. People turning and hugging each other. People are clapping and jumping up and down. Smiles all around. Children are on the backs of their parents, standing up and cheering. American flags are waving throughout this crowd here in Grant Park. People are jammed in here. And now this moment, when Barack Obama is projected as the next president of the United States, an explosion of joy in this park. I'm Steve Kathan, live in Chicago. CBS's Steve Futterman is with the McCain camp in Phoenix.
And Steve, a much different mood here. They are not showing the projections giving Barack Obama the election on the big screens in this ballroom. They continue to play country music in the background. This McCain supporter was asked if he will now give Barack Obama his support.
Obama? No. I'll be just like the Democrats are now with the Bush. So two could play the game.
John McCain's expected to address supporters probably in the next hour. Live at McCain headquarters in Phoenix, Steve Futterman, CBS News.
When Sarah Palin was named by John McCain as his running mate, there was much head scratching, followed by a lot of excitement, and then more head scratching. CBS News exit polling found she did not help the ticket after all.
6 in 10 voters say John McCain's choice of Sarah Palin as vice president was a factor in their vote, and 6 in 10 say Sarah Palin is not qualified to be president if necessary. On the other hand, nearly 7 in 10 say Joe Biden is qualified.
Polling analyst Fred Backus. It appears unlikely that the Democrats will manage any veto-proof majorities on Capitol Hill, but there are gains.
Thank you. Thank you for your hard work, your support, and especially your love. Serving you has been the honor of my life.
That's Republican Senator Elizabeth Dole in North Carolina on her way out, swept aside by the Obama movement. Democrats are expected to be a handful short of the 60-vote supermajority in the Senate. By the way, on Wall Street today, the Dow surged 305 points. The experts say it's relief because finally this election season is ending. The Nasdaq up nearly 54 points. And back in Chicago, where the celebration continues, Obama with at least 283 electoral votes, enough to call moving vans for relocation to Pennsylvania Avenue. This is CBS News.
Obama won 53% of the popular vote to McCain's 46%, the most lopsided victory for a Democrat since Lyndon Johnson's landslide victory over Barry Goldwater in 1964. Obama won 365 electoral votes to McCain's 173. He helped flip 9 states that voted Republican in 2004, and the roster of those states might surprise you considering where politics is today. Let me read them to you. Florida, Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, North Carolina, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and Virginia. With Obama's coattails, Democrats picked up 8 Senate seats and 21 House seats. Hence, that election night euphoria you just heard. Happy Thursday, everyone. This is The Takeout. Relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report is next.